So where we're at today, I've skipped a little bit to the end, you know. From Genesis to Revelation is a good long way. It's a good long way. Revelation 2, 21, 1, 4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any mourning, or crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. John, you know, the Apostle John wrote that after he was on the Isle of Patmos, which is a Greek island where they had all these mines, these Roman mines that they used prisoners to work them, and that's where he was at. I'm sure he had a hard life there. But when he laid down to sleep one night, God got a hold of him and gave him this vision. And the Bible itself is just a stunning piece of literature. It really is. If you don't believe anything written in it, it still is. And there's even secular people who don't believe in the Lord that know that. It was written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And of course, there was a lot of other languages too. The accounts, the stories that came down and ended up being written down by certain people. But from the very earliest, it was about one man. From the very earliest, there was a lot of stories, and in that story, you know, I'm sure you've watched and read stories about detectives and things like that, where there's a main story, there's a story about what's going on now, then there's like a side story. So Jesus is the side story. He's the side story that runs that thread through the whole thing, even though it might be about Ezekiel or the fall of Jerusalem or Abraham going to the promised land and all that. It's still got Jesus in there. And it tells the epic story of God and his creation, how it all started, blessing, temptation, sin, exile, salvation. So we have that advantage of knowing whatever we read, we can find Jesus in it. It's in there. You may be thinking of a certain one, you think, nah, it's not in there, but just read it a little harder. So we got this big book that started out in Genesis 1, so how does it end? And we know that it ends with the book of Revelation. And it's revelation, not revelations. So John had one revelation. It's a story about Babylon, a story about Jesus, a story about judgment. And even though there's a lot there, we're going to try to cover a little bit of it today. First, in verse 1, we see a new heaven and a new earth. That's a lot. You know, the James Webb telescope that they have now can reach out millions of light years further than the other one we had. And they're seeing amazing things out there. And to some people's surprise, the universe is a lot bigger than they thought. They still haven't found that line where it says, you know, I read this sci-fi story one time when I was a kid. You know, I used to be intrigued with that stuff. And you know, this spaceship goes zillions of light years, and it comes to a wall. It comes to a wall. It stops, and there's a button there that says, push. Probably not. It's probably not like that. I mean, it probably is. But who knows? It could be. It could be. So Revelation concludes with this final vision about the marriage of heaven and earth. An angel shows John this bride that comes down from heaven, this new Jerusalem. And God says he's going to be with us, and he's with us now. But God's going to be actually walking down the aisle. You know, he's going to be right here. It's hard to imagine that. And God is so bright that we won't need a sun. It'll just be light everywhere you go. I don't know if we're going to sleep or not, because there won't be no darkness. Maybe there will be in certain areas, but anyway, we don't know that. But we do know that he's making all things new, and that's what he wanted us to know. He wanted John to know that, and he made sure John got off of that island and went back to Ephesus and started spreading the word and writing down these words. I guarantee you there weren't many prisoners left that island. And the story goes that before he went there, they tried to kill him by dumping him in this big vat of boiling oil. And somehow he survived that. It don't even say anything about him being burned. So it's kind of like Daniel in the lion's den. John did the same thing. So the earth at this moment is cut off from everything that goes on in heaven. There's all this crime. We were just talking this morning about the crime, all the misgendering stuff and greed. You know, you read in the news about people that just steal millions of dollars and get away with it and all that stuff. But creation is groaning. It's groaning like a woman in childbirth, you know. You might see signs that the woman's going to have a baby when she gets to 9 months and things start kicking around. You're going to see signs that it's going to happen soon. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing signs that this new life's coming, and it's really a new Garden of Eden. You know, in the Garden of Eden, there was no sin, there was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no shame, there was no sin. Everything was perfect. And here, John looks at it again, and he tells us, "Then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and the Lamb in the middle of its street. On either side of the river was a tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." Revelation 22, 1-2. So we see, even in Revelation, that there's still going to be nations. Now, it's not all individuals, it's going to be nations too. And the nations really need to be healed, don't they? I can't think of any nation on earth that don't need a little healing. And this one needs a lot. It really does. So we see a whole new paradise of God. And this is the prophets talked about this all the way back. And John saw the tree of life. It was accessible. It was always yielding fruit. It never died away. Its roots sank down on each side of the river of life and pulled that life force out of that river. And that's how they grew. So different from Genesis, humanity is not represented by a couple. It's represented by the nations. And so for John, what God's telling John is all this is going to be fulfilled that we've been talking about since way back at the very beginning. It's going to be done. And God is the man that can make a new sun blaze into existence a zillion light years out there. And for some unknown reason, we need that stuff. And people say, well, we're looking for life. Somewhere out there, there's aliens. There may be. The Bible doesn't say that there's not. It doesn't say there is. Basically, I think the Bible makes it pretty clear we need to be concerned about what's going on here and in heaven and not there. But in verse 2, we see a new city. And you know there's a description of that city there. It's not just a return to the garden, but it's like a flash forward to the new city of Jerusalem. And the new city won't be anything like the old one, because it's all new. You know, I'm thinking it's probably going to be in the same place, overlapping quite a bit, but not the same city. You know, Jerusalem is an ancient city that's been conquered many times. Everybody that's come in there has added new things to it and all that. They've identified the gate where Jesus went in on the donkey, and it's been closed up, but it's still there. But Jacob saw a staircase to heaven in his dream, and here John called the bride here the New Jerusalem. And he described it as being all these bright, brilliant stones. It was the first and only city where God resided in a permanent home, permanent house. And that's where it was the first city where the kings worshiped the Creator. And so Jerusalem represented, the old Jerusalem represented the promised land. That was where it was. You know, Jerusalem was originally a pagan city. It was taken over built by the Jebusites, and David, who was king, conquered that city, and it's been Jewish ever since. So if anybody tells you that Palestine don't belong to the Jews, they need to go back there and look at it a little bit. But so Jerusalem represented the ultimate promised land, and it still does. The New Jerusalem represents the new promised land for us, the ultimate promised land. And it's a city that'll be built by God, not by humans. When it comes down out of heaven, it's just really twings your imagination to imagine the city is so big and so bright, so futuristic. You know, if you want futuristic, that's where it's at. Revelation 21:15-21, John describes it. The heavenly city has 4 sides, each with 3 gates, corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 huge foundation stones, which correspond to the 12 apostles. John says the heavenly city is a perfect cube, each side being 12,000 strata. Now, on the individual unit, I don't know how that figures, but I do know that people who know more than I do said that's 1,400 miles. So if you can take a map and put Jerusalem in the center and then spread out 1,400 miles centered on that in every direction, humanity's going to have plenty of room. Plus, they got the rest of the planet too. They're not doing away with the rest of the earth here. That's just the headquarters. You know, I'm sure if you kept everybody at ground level, that you could fit everybody on earth in that space. But there's going to be plenty of places. You know, the most surprising thing at all, there's not going to be any temple. No churches. You don't need churches when you got God with you. Every place he walks is a temple. You know? We don't need to come here and gather and worship, because we'll be walking around amongst ourselves worshiping all the time. Pretty neat, pretty neat. There's a new humanity. Now that humanity will be us, but we'll be new too. And that sounds crazy, but John here wasn't trying to give us a blueprint of everything. He wasn't describing everything in detail, but he was giving us enough to know sort of what it'd be like. And he was using here Old Testament references to God used this to show us these Old Testament references where this came from. The image of a city on a high hill with 12 gates corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel is similar to Ezekiel's vision of the New Jerusalem. And I went over and read Ezekiel 40, and the angel just measured everything right and left. He was measuring the temple. But there won't be no need to measure this when it's already told us how big it is. And in 1 Kings 16:19-20, it talks about a cube, how the Holy of Holies was a cube, just like this city will be a cube. So the entire city will be a temple. The entire world will be a temple. So it'll have the same qualities as the Holy of Holies. You know, in the Holy of Holies, in the old Jewish temple, only the high priest could go in there once a year, because if you went without proper preparation and proper qualifications, you die. It would kill an ordinary person that went in there. But here, the Holy of Holies, we'll actually live in the Holy of Holies. That's pretty amazing. And then in verse 4, we see a new dimension. John's visions leave a lot of questions unanswered, and I think that that's not a bad thing. That's what God wanted. His goal wasn't to tell us every detail about the new world, but he was to tell us, instill confidence in us that the creation is going the way it's supposed to, and that Jesus was resurrected and will be resurrected just like that. So that's the hope of the whole Bible, is that God's story and God's domain and ours will one day be the same. That's hard to imagine. Death will be replaced with life. Pain will be replaced with happiness. Suffering with gladness and joy. It floors you when you think about it. Every nation, every person there will be blessed through the resurrected Jesus. You'll see him walking around too, by the way. I can't imagine Jesus as kind of like the CEO of the whole thing. You know, God's the president, he's the CEO. Probably got a few others running things a little bit. You know, jury maybe running the real estate department. So what about when we die? Well, there's not one passage in the Bible that talks about going to heaven, or it says going to heaven. None of them say you're going to go to heaven. Doesn't appear anywhere in the Old Testament or the New Testament. Amazing. Yet people say all the time, when I die, I'm going to heaven. And you are. But the way Jesus talked about it, and the way Paul talked about it, Jesus said to this criminal on the cross, he says, today you will be with me in paradise. In Luke 23, 42, 43. And Paul was talking about when he could possibly going to be executed in a Roman prison. He said death wouldn't be that bad. It'd make the Philippians sad, but he would get to be with Christ. So that's what heaven is to be with Christ. And we don't know, you know, we're going to be in this first place with Christ, this paradise of God. We're going to be there without a body. And without a body, you're not a complete human. You still exist, but you're not a complete human. But when we resurrected to the new earth, we'll be complete like we are now, only much better. You know, it's like taking a 1940 Chevrolet and dropping it down on a whole new electric chassis, you know, with all the computers and stuff, but it still looks like a 1944 or Chevrolet when it drives up. That's kind of the way Jesus was, you know. He still, his apostles recognized him. Some people had trouble with that, but for the most part, they recognized him when he just walked through a wall. And he could eat. They could feel him. You know, Thomas wanted to feel of him, make sure he's real. He was. But he was all new. He was different. Paul talked about the true hope that drives Christian faithfulness even in the face of death. And he said the result of death was being with the Lord in 2 Corinthians 5, 6 through 9. And so the consistent factor here is not that people will go to heaven, but it's about being with Christ. We'll be with Christ wherever that is. The golden streets and all that, they're going to be here. They're going to be here. They're going to be in that big cubic city. So Jesus and Paul made sure we knew that not even death could separate us from God's love. And we, even when we're dead, we're still with him. And so Paul doesn't envision this disembodied mode when we die as being permanent. He said that in this world we groan, longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling. And he's referring to the resurrected body that we'll inherit when we're finally made like Jesus. So rather than this disembodied bliss where everybody's floating around on clouds and they got the little wings and they're playing the harps, we're going to have an actual physical existence when we land on the new earth. We're going to be just like we are, except better. You know, I plan on running and jumping. I may jump all the way out that door. Yeah. You're not going to be any better than the rest of us, though. We're all going to be like that. So, what about the interim period when we're not, before that happens? Well, Paul says it's like falling asleep. And he wasn't the only one. It was common in the Jewish culture to use the phrase, lay down with my ancestors. That's how they looked at death. And resurrection is waking up. So we're going to lay down with our ancestors and we're going to wake up. Now, are we going to know that we're in that disembodied state before that happens? I don't know. The Bible doesn't really give us the answer to that. But in Revelation, the hope here expressed seems to be in the manner that Jesus was resurrected. He went through death and came out on the other side in a transformed physical existence. He didn't become a ghost. He didn't become a disembodied soul. You know, he didn't bring cold air into the room and make you see a ghost-like figure. He walked in the room and sat down and ate. He walked down by the seashore and sat down and ate fish and offered it to others. He still had the holes in his hands and side, but yet he walked around like he was all new. He ate food, he drank wine, he talked with his followers about the kingdom of heaven. He had those scars on him, but he was really different. You know, he was the same, but he was really different. Now, I don't know what happened with Lazarus when he was brought back, but I suspect it's maybe similar. And that's hard to believe, that a body, you know, they say within 6 seconds after you die that you start decaying. And it takes a little while for that to happen on a large scale, but in the cells, the little machines in the cells, they just sort of quit. They say, quitting time. And they get out of their little machines and off they go. And the cell itself starts dying. Our bodies is composed of billions of cells. And all those cells die. Some of them die at different rates. So 6 seconds after you die, some of that's still alive because, you know, you're still warm and all that. But all that happened, you know, within just a few hours, you are a totally different thing. You're just a thing within a few hours. You know, it's like a loaf of bread. Loaf of bread is nice and fresh, but after a few days, if you set it in the wrong place, you pick it up, it's got that blue stuff on it. That's life, but it ain't the bread's life. So that's the paradox of the same Jesus and also a different Jesus is what God was trying to give John this vision to communicate to us about the new heavens and the new earth, that the future of the universe really walked out of the tomb after the cross. He is the future. He's the whole future. And so what's true for him will be true for everybody because we inherit that. So we can be resurrected and reborn like Christ was. And that's worth writing home about. And John's seen that. It was worth writing about. So he didn't write it as a secret code to decipher when you're going to die or when Jesus is coming back and all that stuff. I'm sure a lot of people have read that into it, but it's a promise, and he's telling us that every nation on earth basically is Babylon, is becoming Babylon. I mean, you look at our own nation and we can see that. You know, people say, well, if things don't get any better, God's going to abandon us. Well, God's not going to abandon us as a church or as saved individuals, but I think God's already abandoned the United States as a nation. That happened. That's done. Because God can't live in an unholy place. And there's always been evil in the world. There's always been evil in this country, but never to this extent. But one day, the new United States is going to be a whole different place. It really is. And we can have hope here in verse 4. He said, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. So you think of this world beyond our imagination, where there's no pain, no suffering, and no death. If we don't get to go to the streets for just gravel, that ain't really going to matter, is it? What really matters is us and God. It's a world where God's visibly present. Visibly. Think about that. And you don't have to be afraid of him because you're his son and his daughter. It's fine. But that's our destination. It's a destination of everybody who believes. And I just want to put that out there today because, you know, we see suffering all around us, and we have loved ones that are hit by it. But we can have that hope, and don't give up on it. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for your word. Thank you for this message, and thank you, Lord, for the Apostle John who did his part and made sure we got this message. And we just love you and thank you for that. In Jesus' name. David, if you